we are back for another episode. Happy Monday, y'all. I hope your year is off to a great start. Yes, breathe it in, breathe it in. We have a guest on today, Susan Morgan Taylor. And Susan is a renowned somatic sex therapist who has helped hundreds of couples deepen the intimate connection and create mutually satisfying sex and intimacy for the long term. She is the creator of the Transformational Pleasure Keys Retreat and the host of the popular Sex Talk Cafe podcast. Oh, I love that. So cozy. Sex Talk Cafe. I like it. And after leaving a sexless marriage and determined not to repeat the same pattern, Susan embarked on a study of her own sexuality, where she soon discovered that love, pleasure, and orgasm are natural states that already exist within us and are easily experienced when the obstacles are removed. Who knew? This personal awakening was the turning point that inspired her to become a sex therapist. And after then a decade in private practice as a couples sex therapist and over 25 years of experience in somatic body-based approaches to healing, Susan then developed the Pleasure Keys process, which is trademarked by her, a three-part approach to empower couples to get back on the same page in sex and intimacy while leaving the frustration, confusion, and chronic self-sacrifice in the dust. And Susan believes that we can change the world by how we have sex and make love, and that our intimate relationships are the most direct opportunity for personal growth and healing. When she is not busy leading couples retreats, you might catch her hiking or singing karaoke in the stunning mountains of Western North Carolina, where she lives. Love, love, love this. I'm very excited for Susan to join us on the show today. We were connected through the wonderful world of the internet, like most of my guests are. It's such a refreshing space to be in as a sex therapist, as a sex coach, sex educator. When you get people that drop into your emails or drop into your DMs, like, hey, I listened to your podcast or I came across your podcast and I have something I want to say. I love when people can step into that light and step into their power of that. And so when Susan found her way to my email inbox, I looked over her stuff and I said, hell yeah, let's do this. Let's get this party started. And I'm excited to hear more from her. We're going to dive into that Pleasure Keys process that I just mentioned of hers, and probably a little bit into the somatic side of things. So let's jump in. If you're someone that's in a sexless marriage, that means you're having sex less than once a month or less, rather, then this might be for you. Or if you're feeling like you're in that roommate syndrome right now in your relationship, this also might be for you. Or if all of these things are things that you want to avoid long term, maybe you're just in a new relationship and you know the science behind how long-term relationships can decline in their sexuality over time. However, if we are intentional about those things and we put as much effort into our now relationship as we did when the relationship was just getting started, aka the dating phase, if we continue to date throughout the entirety of the relationship, then these things can be avoided. So I will stop talking. Let's bring Susan on. Thank you so much for listening. All right. Hello, Susan. Welcome to the Owning Your Sexual Self podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Rachel. I'm so excited to be here today and super excited about our conversation. And I hope this is going to be really useful for your audience today.
Yes, yes. I love when we have guests that are doing the same type of work or similar type of work rather, but also as you shared, right? Like having that willingness to also share your own story. I think that's so important in doing this work, is that we're relatable to what our clients and our participants are going through. And I found in my work too, sharing my own story, right? It inspires people and it gives people that courage to open up and to reach out for help or also share their story, as you're probably seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because I think especially when it comes to sexuality, there's so much shame already around sexuality. I love the work you're doing in the world around that as well, to really help sort of relieve that piece through this, educational work, beautiful work you do. But there's so much shame that we carry around it, and there's always that tendency to kind of hide, or think that we're alone, like nobody else can relate to this. And it's just not true. And I think the reason that, folks like us come into this work is because we have found our way out of these really challenging situations, that there really are solutions out there. And I think it's important that people know that there is help available and that it's not shameful to, get that help and get that support.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and that shame is, something that we'll probably talk about later in this episode of, right, how does that even show up for us? Like how do we even allow shame to be placed on us? And then what are the effects of that over time? And then specifically, right, talking about sexless relationships, and just so often, right, how I know in my client work, right, so how many people are coming to me already in sexless relationships,
Yes.
and it's like, gosh, if we could just tackle this a little bit earlier before it gets to that point, right? Have the
Right.
awareness. But yeah, that's where the shame plays a piece in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, right. I work a lot with couples, as you know, and
Hmm.
I think the research says that couples sit on a problem for an average of 7 years before they seek help for it. And oh my
Wow.
goodness, can you imagine like if we were able to reach out or not so afraid to reach out for support
Hmm.
sooner, that it would, the world would just be a happier place. Because I think when relationships are happy and couples are happy and there's love and there's sex happening, that the world is a better place. But yeah,
Hmm.
7 years is a long time to wait. And it doesn't
Hmm.
need to be that way.
Yes. God, yes, that's a long time. And yeah, I think of some couples that I've worked with and in my time of doing this too, it's like you're right. That time period has gone by and gone by and gone by. And then one day they wake up and like, I don't really think this relationship is serving me anymore, or I don't think this relationship maybe ever served me, and I'm not really realizing it until now. And that can be a hard truth to swallow, and then to take action around. But yeah, how many people in the couples work that you're seeing, like how many people are staying in those relationships where they are unhappy and sort of holding on for something to change or
Right.
yeah, right, like society tells them you're supposed to stay in this.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I did it. I was in a, very unhappy and sexless
Yeah.
marriage. I stayed for 10 years I think there's a lot of factors that can lead to that. But you're right. I think some of it is the social conditioning. And then the other piece is that just not, people may be thinking this is just how it's supposed to be. Like it's supposed
Hmm.
to kind of die out after a while and be unexciting. And then the options are very, not very palatable when you're looking at leaving a marriage.
Hmm.
Or the other thing that tends to happen is people tend to seek outside of the relationship, and
Hmm.
that never really leads to good things when it's covertly done, and not out in the open, not by agreement. But the other option is actually there's a way out, there is help, there's ways to get the spark back. And it takes some work, it takes some effort, it takes some investing, it takes willingness to learn new things, it takes the willingness to rebuild trust, to rebuild connection. But there is a way, and I would much rather personally see relationships succeed and couples stay
Hmm.
together, especially when there's kids involved and life gets
Yeah.
more complex. There really is help out there, and that's really what I'm passionate about, is really helping couples be able to navigate those differences in sexual desire
Hmm.
specifically, and really being able to find pleasure so that sex and intimacy can be fun, it can be easy, they can be in the flow. Everything is better, I think, when our relationships are happy.
Yes, I would agree. And I like that you use the word flow. That's a word that I often use. Like it just in that flow state of, right, like sex can be sex, but when you're in that flow state of sex,
Ah,
it's a game changer, right? Like
yeah.
it's so different.
Yes, that's where it's fun and pleasurable and enjoyable. And then we tend to
Yes.
want it more. We seek it out more because it's
Hmm.
fun. It can actually be fun and mutually satisfying. And, kind of getting out of these habits that I see, I know that I was in, of just sort of, my own personal story, just kind of where you're just there to kind of get it over with and, keep the partner happy. And that's not really like that much fun. And there's not a lot of flow in that. There's a lot
Yeah.
of repression and the shutdown that happens, and
Hmm.
that leads to all kinds of other problems that get bigger over time, that really, when they're nipped in the bud sooner than later, they don't have to lead to negative outcomes. It could really be an opportunity for growth and deepening that connection and deepening the emotional connection as well as the sexual connection.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I hear you're sharing, more about your story. And again, you have this lived experience. Can you give us a little bit more insight about that time for you and sort of the
Yeah.
trajectory of how things progressed?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you. I think the sharing of personal stories is really what makes things relatable so people know that they're not alone. So
Hmm.
me personally, kind of how I got into sexuality work. It was I was in a 10-year marriage, very unhappy for a number of reasons. And one of the aspects of it was pretty much a sexless marriage. And what I think a lot of people don't realize when I share that is I was actually the one that was totally not interested.
Mhm.
I could go like months could pass and I could freaking care less. And a lot of times when the sex did happen, it was just kind of, yeah, let's get it over with, or let's kind of keep him happy. Or, there was some, I mean, I got pleasure out of it. I didn't have any problems with orgasm. I could have lots of orgasms, and that's kind of all it was. And it was really empty. There was like an emptiness to that. And there was this part of me that just, I really longed for something more. I wanted a deeper connection with my partner spiritually, emotionally. I knew there was more to our sexual life than what was really happening. But the problem was, is I had no idea how to create that. Like I didn't know how to create a deeper emotional connection, a deeper spiritual connection. How do we, how do I have these things called full body orgasms that I had heard about and read about? It hurt, and I just thought, well, that's just for other people. That's not for me. It's just some myth. Like I believed that they were real, but I just didn't see that for me. And long story short, I made my spouse really responsible for like, kind of like fixing this in the marriage. And I do give him credit. Like he did, it's not that he didn't try. The problem was is that I didn't take responsibility for my own experience. I wasn't taking responsibility for my pleasure. I wasn't really figuring out how do I create this thing that I'm longing for. There was something more I wanted, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I couldn't name it. And I think I just went into sort of a blame spiral. And that marriage did not last. The sexlessness was an aspect of it. It wasn't the only part, but something really crazy and interesting happened.
Mhm.
My sex drive completely came online, like almost really for the first time. I'd never really experienced myself in this capacity before. After that marriage ended, I really suddenly had an immense libido that came out of
Mhm.
nowhere. And I was like, wow, oh, this is what it means to be alive.
Mhm.
I entered into another relationship. It was a couple of years after my divorce. And much to my chagrin, it kind of had some of the very same patterns start to arise in that relationship. It was a brief relationship. It didn't last very long. But this person came in and he actually had a lot of education and training around sexuality. And he was like, hey, you're going to be able to experience full body orgasms and all these really great things. Well, he did not deliver. I had this, mindset, oh, here's this guy who finally knows what he's doing and he's going to rock my world and deliver all these great experiences to me sexually. Well, he did not deliver. And when that whole relationship came to, an end, which again, kind of a short-lived experience, I had this realization of like, wow, I have always made my partners responsible for my sexual pleasure.
Mhm.
I realized like, wow, this is an issue that's kind of following me. So I, very quickly realized that I was very much in the wrong to put my ex-husband kind of in that position of having to solve this for me or for us. Because here's this other person who actually had skills and training and had studied sexuality and like did not deliver. But I had this moment of realizing, like, wow, well, if he said he was going to do all these things to me and make my body experience all these things, then surely it's my body.
Mhm.
So there must be a pathway in my body that could lead me to having those experiences. That if I took the time to find those pathways and to study this and learn about my own body, my own sexuality, my own sexual energy, my own arousal style, like if I took the time and invested in that on my own, that I could find that pathway within myself. And that's exactly what happened. So I decided that I was going to undergo the study of my own sexuality. It was like a Tuesday morning in December of 2011. I remember it very clearly. And I just announced to myself, like, okay, I'm going to figure this out and I'm just going to start to learn. I'm going to study. And what I did is I set aside every week, I set aside time to be with myself and to be with my body and to touch myself physically and intimately sexually. And that was a huge game changer, just like taking that time to be with my own body and to explore like what do I feel? What feels good? What is pleasurable for me? Something really interesting that happened that I realized that I actually did not have a lot of sensitivity in my genitals. Now I could have lots of orgasms during sex, but what was really strange is when I would attempt to self pleasure, I couldn't feel a lot.
Mhm.
And so I learned how to completely slow down and get really, really present and to let that be okay. So I didn't try to fix or change anything. I just got really present and really curious.
Mhm.
And one of the things that happened was I started to have massive emotional releases. I had all this
Mhm.
grief, I had anger, I had frustration. All these emotions started to like just burst out of my body until eventually, and this happened actually pretty quickly. This was over really just the course of a few weeks. So I'm not even
Mhm.
talking months. Suddenly I could feel more. I had more sensitivity in my genitals. And during one of my self pleasure practices, I suddenly had a moment where all of a sudden, just my hands started to vibrate and tingle. My face almost went numb. And I had this wave of pleasure that started in my feet and rolled up through my whole body and like shot out of my heart. And all this love and
Mhm.
pleasure just coursed through my whole body. And I had this moment of like, oh my God, like I'm having this full body orgasmic
Mhm.
experience. But like I just this was some, that's for other people. I'm having it. And I had this realization that very moment that those are states that live within us. Not like we are love. I am love. I am love. Pleasure exists within my body. Orgasm is actually a natural state that exists within me. It's
Mhm.
not something someone can give to me. Someone can't bring me an orgasm, bring me pleasure. I didn't need any longer to like grasp onto relationship to find love. Like I had this really real experiential moment that I am those things, and that I have access to those at will when I kind of, get rid of the things that are in the way of my ability to access and experience myself in that capacity.
Mhm.
And there are things, obstacles to pleasure, obstacles that, we can talk about that if you want. But I had actually done the work to clear some of those things out. And so I was able to have this experience of pleasure, love, and orgasm just within my body with myself. And I realized that those are things that I could then from that point forward, I could bring a lover into that. And since I knew the pathway within my body, I could show him how to unlock that within me because I knew it within myself. I knew my
Mhm.
body now well enough to be able to potentially bring a partner into that. And I was very blessed. A number of months later, I did meet somebody who was really awesome and really open to growing and learning and exploring. And so I was able to bring a lot of that into the relational context. And it was very beautiful. And that was really my turning point for why I wanted to become a sex therapist and specialize in sexuality education, helping women. Initially, it was really my emphasis was on women's sexuality, but that really turned into couples coming to me for help. Like, how do my partner doesn't want to have sex with me. Like, how do we solve this? Because I was that woman. And so that's really where I got passionate about sharing this with the world because the world is a better place when women are experiencing pleasure, joy, orgasm, and love. And when we know
Mhm.
how to create that consciously through our sexual relationships.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, gosh, what a beautiful story of right, like feeling. I'm sure like some sort of failure, some sort of defeat after leaving that marriage, but then really like putting the power back into your own hands. Like I can solve this problem. I have the control. Like I am the answer essentially. And one of the things I wanted to ask you when you said you started to set that time aside to do those really pleasure practices, whether it was intimate or not, but just that physically touching yourself and touching your body, connecting with yourself. I'm curious, what was there any resistance that came up around that? Did that time come and then you were like, this is dumb. I don't want to do this, right? What was there resistance really that came up around that?
Well, that is such a good question. I would say for where I was at that point in time, I was just so wanting something to be different that I did not encounter a lot of that. There was resistance that came up, but in terms of doing the practice, no, because I was like, I'll do whatever it takes. Like I need
Mhm.
something different and I need something more. But I do see that come up a lot with my clients, like
Mhm.
around, especially with women, like, because our stuff's internal. There's a lot more shame around women touching themselves. And I do see it as a very common thing of like feeling gross or dirty or bad. It's a normal thing that can come up around self-pleasure. Where the resistance hit for me wasn't so much in like showing up for myself in that way initially, but where the resistance hit was when I hit like numbness. And then I got frustrated. And then I'm like, oh my
Mhm.
gosh, something needs to be happening and it's not. And so that's a really common mindset that we tend to have generally around sex and especially around self-pleasure, that if I'm not feeling a lot, that something's wrong and it should be different. And that's actually an obstacle to pleasure.
Mhm.
It's an obstacle also to orgasm and orgasmic experience, because we're creating resistance. So, one of the things that I did to work with myself and help myself through that, when I noticed that I was getting into that state of, oh, I don't feel anything, something's wrong. Um, the one of the practices is just total relaxation and embrace of what is. So actually just relaxing and letting that thing be as is, letting the numbness be there,
Mhm.
and the inquiry of, okay, I feel numb, so what else do I notice? What else do I notice when there's numbness? And then I would notice, God, I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated because I want something more. And that's okay. So we're going to stay with the frustration. So if I'm allowing myself to notice the
Mhm.
frustration, I give myself space and permission to feel the frustration, then what else do I feel when I feel that? And beyond that, what happened for me was I was able to access really deep anger and then immense sadness.
Mhm.
So immediately the numbness is no longer, because now there's frustration, which is not numbness. There's anger,
Mhm.
that's not numbness. Now there's grief and sadness, that's not numbness. And as I said yes to those things, that's how the pleasure actually started to open and the sensation started to
Mhm.
open, and there was more to be felt. So I mean, I would just love to give that to your listeners too, that
Yeah.
it's not about, right, like we don't need to fix or change something, at least in the work that I do. It's about the full embrace of the thing that's arising as the gateway actually in to greater pleasure, deeper connection, and more orgasmic experiences.
Mhm. Yeah, and just that beautiful reminder of really allowing yourself to feel. And for so many people, right, women, whether it is experiencing inability to orgasm or inability to connect, a lot of times we're pushing that down, right? We're not letting ourselves feel that. It feels bad, it feels icky, it feels, wrong, essentially. But yeah, just as you described in that practice, feeling into that, okay, what is here, and allowing yourself to sit with that. And then as you see, right, you have that emotional release, which your body needs. Your body probably needed that for a really long time. You didn't know. And then yeah, what gets to be on the other side of that for you? Just all
Absolutely.
the
And I think,
beautifulness.
yeah, when it comes to women and women's sexuality, I know a lot of your listeners are women. That is our gateway into love, pleasure, and orgasm, is actually through our capacity to
Mhm.
feel and to embody those emotions. And what happens a lot of times is that that's conditioned out of us. We have to be nice, we have to please. Don't be angry, don't be sad. I got those messages all the time as a kid. And so I stopped being angry, I stopped being sad, and I also stopped being happy, and I just stopped feeling everything. And how that translates into our sexual energy is that it shuts it down, it will flatten it out. And so part of the process of unwinding that so that we can have more pleasure, more enjoyment, is learning to fully feel ourselves, to give ourselves permission for all of it to exist, making all of it right, none of it
Mhm.
wrong. And in the sexual encounter, we have, I think there's a lot of conditioning too. And tell me what you think, Rachel, around, oh, it's sex. So it's supposed to be only like the good emotions should be here. Only the happy
Mhm.
should be here because we're having sex. That's a myth.
Yes.
That's a myth. Where the hot stuff happens is when we can, as women, bring all of it in. Can we
Mhm.
bring all of our emotions and all of our expressiveness, all of our energy, more of our energy? Can we drop more deeply into it and be felt in that? And ideally be with a partner who can like hold that and not be scared off by that expression, right? Because that's
Mhm.
literally where the arousal happens, the turn on happens, and the orgasmic states come from our capacity to embody more of that emotion. So saying yes to all of it, inviting all of it into the sexual encounter.
Mhm. Yeah, I think having an experience, there was a point in my life where I was going through some pretty dark depression, just a phase of my life where I'm like, who am I? What am I meant to do? Right? This identity crisis essentially. And I remember having an experience with my husband, and he's privy to this information, he understands what's going on, and we created a sexual experience around that. And that was the first time I experienced what I call now as a crygasm. But for him to be holding me into that space and and encouraging me, and it's like it's okay, you're safe to be here, you're safe to feel, right, while sexual pleasure is happening at the same time. And I remember in the moment, I'm like, it was such a mind fuck. I'm like, wait, what is happening? Like, this feels good, but I'm also so deeply sad and confused. But also, this, like, it's an experience I'll never forget, right? The first time that this happened. And right, and literally having that emotional release, like tears, sobbing as I'm experiencing orgasm at the same time. It's like,
Yes.
wow, yeah, wow. And then to be have somebody else bear witness to that, right? Your
Yeah.
person, like, yeah, vulnerability to the extreme, essentially, is what that was.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, that's the thing is our emotions are tied into our life force energy. And the word libido literally means life force. It's really about our lust. Well, I don't know if that's the actual like etymology of the word, so don't quote me on that, but
When you said that, I was like, oh, really? I had no idea.
but it's like the lust for life, like the
Yes,
definition.
yes.
Like the actual like etymology. Where I can look that up. But like the definition of libido, like it's not it's the lust for life, the desire and drive towards life. And if you think about that, why we connect that with the sexual energy, because literally the sexual energy, one of the aspects of that, I mean, it can literally create physical life. That's an
Hmm.
aspect of what it's used for. But it's also, when we have a healthy libido, we have a healthy desire to, it's not just about the act of intercourse. That's a very limited understanding of sex anyway. But high libido is really that just desire to feel, to connect, to be, to express, to expand, to create. There's life force in that, and our emotions are directly correlated with the libido. They're a huge aspect of that. So
Hmm.
it's not surprising at all to me to hear you share that story about the crygasm, because tears and crying are like they're a portal into orgasm.
Hmm.
And actually, any emotion actually can be a portal into orgasm. I've had experiences
Hmm.
where I've had like, just deep anger, and like I have an orgasm
Yeah.
from that, from just saying yes to it. It shifts into like massive pleasure and orgasm. I
Mm.
know other people who have had similar experiences, and I think the first part is as women learning to really receive ourselves in that, to hold ourselves in that, to be able to accept and say yes to those feelings in our own body. And then in a
Hmm.
relational context, your partner, what you were sharing, how you had your partner holding you, it's safe. You
Hmm.
can go there. I'm here. I got you. I got you. Like,
Hmm.
so that you can fully let go of any need to sort of patrol or have that fight or flight brain on. You can drop fully into the feeling state. And that's a
Hmm.
massively beautiful place of deep, deep pleasure. And so, relationally speaking, there's a lot of beauty that can come from that, and ways that we can consciously create those experiences.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. And so what you're describing, right, with these touch practices, some of this, it is somatic work. And so were you doing some self-somatic work before you went through the somatic sex therapy training? Did you even know what it was, or where did that fall in the line for you?
Yeah, just for your listeners, so somatic, I'm a somatic sex therapist, meaning that
Hmm.
we incorporate the body in the work that we do. So that means that we're using the body as a source of wisdom. We're using real-time experiences. So not just talking about stuff that's happened last week, let's try this tomorrow. It's about actually creating experiences in the moment where the things actually arise in the moment. So we work with them in real time.
Hmm.
So that's the somatic aspect of what I do. There's a lot of different expressions of somatic work out there in the world, a whole range of actually touching, doing genital touch, hands-on work, to just doing more structured experiences where those emotions are coming online in real time and we're using the body and there's no touch happening at all. So I just want to clarify that there's a big range. So with my couples, well, I do a lot of different things on that. But to answer your question, my background is I was a massage therapist for
Hmm.
25 years. So I've been touching naked bodies in dark rooms for money for a long time. That's my joke. I have a lot of experience already, working with bodies, working with emotions, blah, blah, blah. So I didn't really have, when I was coming into this work, I didn't have that context. I didn't know really that that was a whole field of sexuality work and sex therapy that I could explore. However, I knew also that that was really in my experience, what I had experienced up to this point, really the best way to address it. Because just talking about stuff in reading, I had read books and, done the whole thing, and like that didn't it gave me the intellectual piece, which is important. It gave me context and education, which is great. But I needed to have an actual experience, like in my body, of what this thing is and what it feels like. And until I did that, I didn't really get the forward movement that I had been hoping to get. And so I think the whole somatic stuff that for me came online a little bit later when I came into some of the somatic sex education work and the trainings that are out there that were really big
Mm-hmm.
game changers for me. And I now, I don't necessarily touch, I don't, I've experimented with different kinds of work in terms of hands-on work with clients, and I'm not doing so much of that now. But with my couples, I mostly work with couples. And I
Mm-hmm.
do a lot of coaching on helping them learn how to navigate the touch experience and how there's a
Mm-hmm.
whole system to it and an art to it. And when you learn that skill, that's really how they're able to find mutual satisfaction when two people
Mm-hmm.
are in totally different places sexually. One person wants one thing, the other person wants the other, and that person doesn't want to do the thing. And so nobody's getting what they want. So a lot of the type of somatic work I do now is really about coaching couples on how to navigate that space, build the skill set so they can have the communication and actually negotiating and creating those experiences. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the pleasure key. You asked about the pleasure keys process earlier. That's
Yeah.
really it. It's really a framework that we're working with that involves the skill of being able to, notice what's happening, um, identify it, name it, and then negotiate it. So there's sort
Mm-hmm.
of these three things happening that are different. They're each kind of a different skill set.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more of a framework of how we learn how to get what we want and how to have more fun and flow and ease and intimacy.
Mm-hmm. And with you, you have a lot of experience with couples, and I'm finding with not with every couple, but with a large amount of couples, I think the taking ownership is one of the hardest parts for them to get over. Of like it's taking ownership for your own stuff, and like you said, getting away from the blaming. He's not doing this, she's not doing this, or he's doing too much of this, whatever it is. But and then for both people to be on the same page, can you speak a little bit to that? Like what happens if just one person is all in and the other person is like, I don't know, I'm just here because they want me to be here, right? Like do you think it can work in that case?
I absolutely do. And this is actually my specialty area of getting couples back on the same page. Actually
Mm-hmm.
have a whole program around named that back on the same page.
Yeah.
It absolutely can work. And that's what it comes down to. There's a lot there. This is a really, it's a big topic, and I know we have limited time today. But ultimately, at its core, first of all, what I'll tell couples is okay, if you look at your sexual relationship, your intimate relationship, and even just your relationship in general, and you decide that you are 100% each responsible for your own pleasure. You're responsible for your own pleasure in the sexual relationship.
Mm-hmm.
I'm 100% responsible for my experience that I'm having in this sexual relationship. I'm responsible for my pleasure. What does that change for you? And 10
Mm-hmm.
times out of 10, it changes everything. All of a sudden, if I'm 100% responsible for the experience that I'm having, then it's up to me. If something's going down that's not feeling great for me, it's up to me to do something about that. It's no longer on my partner. If I'm being touched in a way that I don't love, it's not up to my partner to have to like read the smoke signals, right? Or read my mind. That would be great. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
he's pretty intuitive, but we're human beings. So it's up to me to be able to develop the skills so that I can speak up for that and knowing how to do it in a way that I can be heard where it's not shaming. It's not shaming, it's not blaming, and it's me taking responsibility 100% for the experience that I'm having. And if my partner's also doing that, and we have the skills to know how to do that, then the sky is the limit. We can create all different kinds of experiences where no one's doing anything they don't want to do. And that comes down to really, there's a really fine difference between, there's an aspect of wanting. I'm wanting something. That's my desire. I'm following
Mm-hmm.
my desire. Then there's a quality of being willing. Am I willing to follow my partner's desire? Do I have willingness to go there and to try that, to do that? Maybe I'm a full yes. Maybe I'm like, I'm willing if we can tweak these couple of things. And maybe I'm just not willing at all. And then maybe there's something else that we can do instead. So the
Mm-hmm.
conversation around it never has to come to just a complete standstill. There can always be a continual exploration, and continual exploration of, maybe there's things I need to have in place before I'd be willing to try that. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
we could work towards that more slowly. Maybe we're not going to get the whole enchilada, right? We're just going to kind of start with
Yeah.
something a little smaller. But
Hmm.
that problem absolutely is solvable. And literally, it's just a matter of learning the skills to know how to navigate those differences so that you can get back on the same page. That's something I love helping couples
Hmm.
do. It's my favorite thing. Favorite thing.
Yes. Yes, we're definitely going to need the link to that back on the same page course that you mentioned or that resource
Yeah,
because I
absolutely.
that comes up quite a bit. As I said, that comes up quite a bit with my couples, and we're working on it. I do similar work, so not to say that right when that happens, I'm like, I don't know, go see somebody else. Like we, I have my own ways, but I would love to hear your take on that as well. But even just that
Yeah.
question, right? Like really, and I do similar work of like, yeah, putting the responsibility, what do you actually have control of and taking it again away from that blaming. And I also like that you mentioned too, taking it slow. If, as you said, the whole enchilada, if what I want, we put that at the level 10, well, we got to work our way up to the level 10. We can't expect for our partner all of a sudden to want to be
Right.
spanked, right?
Right.
Or
Right.
all of a sudden want to be hit with a flog, or all of a sudden want to start going to sex parties with you, or
Yeah.
like there's steps into that. And as we were speaking earlier, into the connection and getting into that flow state of sex, working on those practices, in my opinion, like that's how you
Yeah.
get to getting everything you want out of your sex life.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as far as the resource, is it okay to share with your
Yeah,
audience
oh
the link
please,
to
yeah.
that? Yeah. So the thing that will like the best spot for people who are listening to this to start, like if they want to kind of understand where you begin, because a lot of times with getting back on the same page and things and navigating those differences, we're starting a few steps actually too far ahead. So we want to actually back it way up. And there's some very fundamental principles that need to be in place
Mhm.
so that you can learn to navigate those differences. And then also having more flow, more ease, and a deeper connection. So I have a resource on that called the Pleasure Keys, and that's a downloadable PDF guide that your listeners can get at pleasurekeys.com. If they just go there to pleasurekeys.com, that they can download that guide, and that'll give them a really nice place to start with a couple of really simple things they can do kind of right away to start to
Mhm.
make some changes in that area. And then if they're interested in, any of the programs I have, they can link into that through my website at pathwaytopleasure.com. But pleasurekeys.com
Mhm.
is the best spot to start, just to get that free resource and kind of see if, yeah, they can get started
Mhm.
getting back on that same page and learning how to, the number one place to begin, which again, we've got to really take it a few steps back. And it's less about like the doing of the thing and more about cultivating these principles, which I call the pleasure
Mhm.
keys, cultivating these three things that need to be in place before we're going to be able to kind of get to that next step of,
Mhm.
like you said, like creating
Mhm.
experiences that maybe are kind of a little bit more expanded or outside of what one person wants to do and the other doesn't. We need to have these three things in place. So the pleasure keys is a great spot to get started for your
Mhm.
listeners.
Yes, thank you. And we'll make sure to link that into the show notes too, so people can just click and it takes them right there. And yeah, another thing I want to add too for people that are listening, right? We're talking essentially for a lot of people, right, to be able to go back to the basics, go back to the beginning, like figuring things out, slowing things down. And I just want to mention here, like how exciting that can be to be able to go back to some of those things and to relearn some of those things. Like for many people, or let's say if it's we take penetration off the table and you're solely
Mhm.
focusing on manual stimulation and then moving into oral stimulation, right? When's the last time you gave a hand job, or when's the last time you received a hand job? And yeah, while you might want the right, I just want to bang it out real quick and like get to orgasm as quick as possible. One of the things I coach people on is tantric penis massage and tantric vulva massage. It's like the beauty behind that, right? Like there's so many things under the
Yeah.
realm of sex and what that can look like. So many different practices. And right, if you're a couple that's going back to the basics, thinking of it in that way, like, okay, what new things can we either add to our toolbox, or what are some old things that we forgot about that we sort of left to
Mhm.
the wayside? Um,
Yes.
because that's really what you're wanting, right? You want to recreate that new relationship energy. So going
Yes.
back to some of those things that were happening in the beginning of the
Yeah.
relationship.
Well, you make such a good point too. And I think we tend to have this idea that sex, when we hear the word sex, all we're thinking of is penetration
Hmm.
and genitals, where that's important, that's great, but you're right. Like, kind of once we cross that threshold in a
Hmm.
relationship, we tend to ignore all the other cool things that maybe were happening before that act happened, the
Mhm.
things that created excitement and anticipation and the possibility of having orgasmic experiences where no touch is happening at all. How
Mhm.
about that? And how about discovering your own arousal map? Because some of us are wired where we are more aroused by less genital stimulation, not more. And so if in a relationship more stimulation, genital stimulation is happening, but you're wired in a way where that's not the main arousal map for you, it makes sense that then maybe things aren't there's desire discrepancy happening, right?
Mhm.
Like, oh, I'm
Mhm.
kind of like not turned on by that, or I notice my body shuts down because it's happening too fast. So having the answers to that and having things illuminated around what's actually going on, how is your arousal designed? How is your partner's arousal designed? You can start to actually speak each other's language and then being able to
Mhm.
literally have language, actual language to
Mhm.
facilitate those experiences. It's so liberating. And that's literally, there's really an anatomy to pleasure.
Mhm.
There's a way that pleasure can be consciously created, but we need to have the skills to be able to do it. And we need to
Mhm.
have the language. And then, like you said, Rachel, like slowing things down and backing it way up to the point where it's actually not about doing of the actual thing. It's about the noticing of what's happening right now in my body. What am I desiring? What am I wanting? What is my
Mhm.
body asking for? What's happening right now in my body? And if we don't have access to that, we're going to have a very hard time really being able to access more orgasmic states, more pleasure, much less negotiating more complex sexual experiences.
Mhm. Yeah. What a wonderful conversation we've had today. Thank you again so much for coming onto the show, sharing your resources, again, sharing your stuff, your story. I know that takes a lot of bravery and courage, so thank you again for that. And if people would like to find you on social media or connect in that way, are you on social media?
I am, yes, Instagram and Facebook under Susan Morgan
Okay.
Taylor.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for coming on the show,
Oh,
and it was a pleasure having you.
thank you so much, Rachel.